Good afternoon and welcome to the UK Column Live. My name's Robert Ryder. I'm just really a general member of the public, and I'd like to introduce here Patrick Quantenon.
Hello.
Right, good afternoon, and could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a GP, or have been a GP for 18 years, particularly in the Channel Islands on Alderney. And after 18 years, I quit the job, literally. I gave away the practice, went back home, never looked back. And the reason mainly was that I was so disappointed with my job and everything that it entailed. So for me, it was making the choice to either stay there and slowly die, I think, or step out and do different things, go and look at, because I'm still doing the same thing now, I look at health and I try to help people with their health and their health problems, but look at things slightly differently. And that is what I've learned over the years, and it's a learning process that obviously never stops.
And obviously that led you to this statement on your website, which, if we bring up your website there.
The website has been around for quite a long time now, and the main issue about the website is that it's full of articles about a whole lot of stuff, medical stuff, scientific stuff, but also spiritual stuff or psychological, whatever people want to call it. And for me, it was important to, on the website, to actually tell people what had happened to me, or why I was quitting my job as a GP. And then I thought, well, the best way to do that is to put it on the website for everybody to see for years to come.
It was quite a bold statement, to be honest. You had to admit you were wrong. This has led to where you are now.
Yes, it is. I had to admit that I was wrong, or at least those are the words that I used, because at the time, certainly that was how I felt. And so, to me, that was the beginning of the new era.
Well, today, the reason I've came here today is to talk about mainly vaccination.
Right.
But we've decided we can't really talk about this until we actually analyse what is illness and talk about illness.
Yes, I think you always have to go for the roots in order to understand the plant. So vaccinations is one part, and it's an important part of the medical structure and the medical arsenal for treatments and so on. But it starts with the idea of what health actually is. And you can't define health in terms of the absence of illness, because then you have to define illness. Now, when we look elsewhere outside the Western world for ideas about different ways of talking about health and describing it, then you find that in large parts of the world, health is seen as a balance. So it's a balance of whatever. That can be different things, or can be described as different things. And illness is then simply being out of balance. But these cultures, these people, they start off from the conception that health is a given thing. In other words, health, the balance in life, is the best there is for each individual, but not each individual having the same kind of health. In other words, they don't accept that everybody will have to have the same blood pressure. Your blood pressure, when you're in balance, is the best there is for you. And so that may be determined by our doctors as a low blood pressure or a high blood pressure, because they standardize everything. Standardize as in the mean of the whole group.
And if it doesn't come into that section, is something wrong?
Then it's something wrong, and what is more important, then you come to the conclusion that it needs treatment. right? So, and that actually, we've seen that happen quite a bit over the years, whereby these definitions of health have been changed, and all of a sudden we ended up with an awful lot more ill people. One example for that would be the blood pressure, because when I started off as a GP, say somebody from about 90 with a blood pressure of 60 over 90, we would go, okay, we'll keep an eye on it. You know, you're a bit older and it happens, but nothing bad. Just let it go. Then we got a rule saying everything over 14 over 90 is hypertension and needs treatment. And within 5 years, it became everything that is outside 12 over 8 is hypertension. And
nobody's considered an individual. This is just...
No.
They don't take into account the individuality of the person, the lifestyle, the weight, etc.
And you see this in all aspects of the way health is described. You know, it's the same with your weight. Your weight is in a little book, and it shows me I'm this tall, so there's my perfect weight. It tells you nothing about who I am or how I grew up or.
So my journey on this really was started with tendinitis in my elbow. The doctors couldn't do anything. They wanted to put me on steroids. And I just done a bit of research and drank some nettle tea, and that was it gone. So I started to question.
Right.
And when you're a father, you worry about the health of your children. So I thought there's something else not quite right in it. Mm-hmm. And with other work, you know, what the UK column look into, you know, these other areas of life that aren't quite right.
Yeah.
So I started questioning, and it led me to start questioning, like we said, what is illness? So if we can just analyse what we've been told for the last 100 or so years, that basically Louis Pasteur, germ theory, is this hero. He found out why we're ill, you know. Mm-hmm. Is there anything to back him up? Is this scientifically proven, or what would we say?
Well, it's very interesting there, because that is actually where you need to start. You know, how has all this vaccination stuff, where does it begin? And obviously, in the vaccination history, there are times before that, and it goes back to Jenner, but it goes back before him. But with Pasteur, it got a format, and it got scientific backing, if you like. Yeah. But the interesting thing is that on my journey through life, and as you've done, you know, finding out information, I was given more than a few years ago now, I was given a little book, and it was all about Louis Pasteur. It was written in 1917, and it showed all the things that went wrong with his experiments, with his conclusions, and that he, even in his own time, scientists were actually pretty mad at this guy, because he was not doing any scientific work, but he was concluding big things without backing it up. Then later on, I found a whole bunch of people that from the time of Louis Pasteur, with André Béchamp as the first one, which was a professor in France at 2 different universities, who
wasn't him who actually first shown the process of microbes transporting to other people, rather than Béchamp.
That really has never been, has never scientifically been proven. There's a lot of talk about it, and it's put forward that way, but there is no transference. The medical books also say, you know, that your germs, like your fungi and your bacteria, and certainly also your viruses, that they are specific for the species. In other words, that if you have a bacteria that causes a particular illness, say a bronchitis in fish, that will be a different subject altogether from a human one. The transference of bacteria from one species to another and from one organism to another has not actually been proven unless you rub it into open wounds or you inject it into the organism. The main thing about Pasteur was, or the two main things were that one, he said that all causes of disease came from outside the organism. So we were invaded by a group of terrorists.
So we,
right?
we have enemies.
Yeah, we have enemies.
We need to be afraid.
Actually, we need to be afraid, and actually, when it comes down to it, and I think over the years, we've come to this point in our history where on television and in the media, they indeed tell us to be afraid of everything. Yeah, there are germs everywhere, in your bed, you know, on the carpet, you know, everywhere. And we have to be afraid of them because they're going to attack you and they're going to kill you or make you seriously ill. The second premise was that microorganisms would all stand by themselves and they could not develop from one group into another.
Monomorphism is that?
Monomorphism. Now, even during the time of Pasteur, they found proof that bacteria would just come and develop from one type into another, if you changed, and when you changed, the feeding ground. In other words,
the pleomorphism.
Yeah, and they proved the pleomorphism to be right. We're not now talking about, you know, 100 years ago, over 100 years ago. This particular thing, that pleomorphism, has come back time and time again. It has been proven, reproven by people who didn't know anything about what had gone before and in different parts of the world. Yeah? Just independently coming to the same sort of a conclusion. Hey, there's a bacteria, look, it grows into this and then into that. So, you know, what are we doing? But the idea of Pasteur was they were all single individuals, which means if you have to be afraid of all of them and you're going to have to protect yourself, you're going to have to protect yourself against every single individual.
You have to avoid or kill the enemy, basically.
Kill the enemy, make yourself, so therefore you need antibiotics, right? That was the premise for that. Or...
So it's fair to say without Louis Pasteur, germ theory, we wouldn't have the modern medicine as it is at all. I would say that at that time, and continuously since that time, the authorities, medical authorities, have chosen the path that Pasteur set down and ignored what scientific researchers proved to them once, twice, 3 times, multiple times. And that was that bacteria changed from one into another, and therefore if you were protected from one, if you like, then you were protected from another. Not from all of them, but from a whole group. And would it be also correct today to say scientifically that the bacteria is actually there beneficially?
Yeah, the main thing that came out of the scientific research was that, not as Pasteur was saying, that the bacteria that is making you ill is attacking you and breaking down your tissues. The main thing that repeatedly was proven was that all microorganisms that we find in the site of infections are there because of the diseased tissue. In other words, they turn it around and they go, the tissue is diseased first. The healthy cells are no longer there. They become ill.
So the bacteria don't attack the healthy cells?
The bacteria actually come from within the diseased tissue. In other words, they don't come from outside. You don't have to think about breathing in a bacteria that then creeps through your lungs into the bloodstream and then finds this little spot in your kidneys and goes, oh, I'll go and live here, you know, and I'll eat everything that is around me. And don't question how this can happen, because you have an immune system running through your veins and in your blood that is there, so-called, to recognize foreign invaders.
And we all know if you was to sneeze on a room of 12 people, they wouldn't all get the cold.
No, it's more than that. It's every single time, even when we take major problems like Black Death or whatever that runs all the way across Europe. The one main feature is that there is always survivors, which means that the key to surviving or to being ill does not lie with the microorganism, but lies within the person.
What made them survive?
It is whether they are ill within themselves or getting ill, or whether they can stay healthy. And literally, it is like that. If you can literally say to yourself, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting ill. This is not for me. This has nothing to do with me. Then you can walk through it.
And rather like a composter in your garden, the bacteria are helping to convert this wasted tissue into something that's actually useful. And when they've done the job, it's thank you very much.
Then they're gone. Yeah. What actually happens is that when the tissue starts to deteriorate, within the tissue you get organisms that occur from within the tissue, and they feed on the broken down tissue, on the debris. As long as that food is there, those organisms will reproduce and will be there. Once you remove the food for the organism, so if you had a spell of being ill, feeling ill, whatever, not being healthy, not being in balance, then you may have a infection. Breaking down of the tissue, within your own tissue, you create the microorganisms that are very specific for the type of debris that is left there. These microorganisms, they feed on the tissue, clean it all up, make it very healthy, and then die.
So when we're talking about epidemics and pandemics, we're talking really about similar people in similar circumstances, having similar toxicity, producing similar responses.
Yes, and this of course is why they keep selling their story, because the medical profession refuses to talk about energies, about similar conditions, you know, and how, for instance, how fear lowers your resistance dramatically. So you become ill through fear, and then you need these microorganisms to get you healthy again.
So you have to listen to your body when you've got these microorganisms. There's something, you haven't been attacked, there's something wrong in your diet, your lifestyle.
Yes, we're not going to go into what exactly it is that you need to do to be healthy, but it is about finding that balance between how you're made, who you internally are, and the kind of life that you lead. A
very interesting part of this is the virus.
Yes.
And we're told that these viruses run around the world, affecting people. We're told when the Spanish went to South America, they wiped out the indigenous people with smallpox, I believe it was. Now, I spent a little bit of time in Peru, in the Amazon basin, and we had the health visitors coming round talking to about dengue fever.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them, you know, what is happening? And she said, the mosquito doesn't give you the virus. I didn't understand what she was saying at the time, but she said it activates it within you.
Mm-hmm.
After further studying, what I'm understanding now is that a virus is created when you're poisoned, when your cells are poisoned. So if she's saying with my basic understanding at the time, the virus was activated inside me. I'm presuming the mosquito was poisoning me, which poisoned the cell.
No, there again, think about it in terms of food. Why are some people getting stung and why the one who's standing next to you doesn't? It's food. The mosquito stings you because you or your blood contains the food that it requires. And if you don't have that, you don't get bitten by a mosquito. What does that mean? That means that you're already ill, that you have a certain set of waste products, and the mosquito is attracted by that. And indeed, the mosquito injects a little bit of poison, and you can see that as a homeopathic message. It alerts your system to that particular waste that is hanging around, and therefore it starts the process of eliminating that waste. And that can mean just, locally on your skin, or it may mean that it upsets your gut, or it gives you a high fever in your blood, and so on. So again, the disease is already within you. The mosquito comes to help, to alert your system to the illness, so that your system can respond very adequately if it's got enough
So the
energy.
virus is a result of illness, not the cause of
the
illness.
The viruses are very interesting, and I find it very interesting how they use them, because it's one of the things in my study that I really hated. I couldn't get my head around those viruses, but anyway, we got through it, and I thought that would be it. I would never ever have to look at viruses again for the rest of my life, until all this blew up in my face. And so I got my books out again, and I started looking at viruses and trying to understand what viruses were about. And I'd settled in for a really long slog of dry information that I couldn't get my head around. But it turned out to be rather different, because in the first paragraph of this huge course, in the first paragraph, it tells you that viruses are not alive.
They're
dead. That you can't catch it. That it is very specific for species and for organs. In other words, a virus that they find in your liver will not attack or not be found in your kidney. And then through my studies, I find the same pattern there as we have with the microorganisms. Viruses contain nothing more than a tiny little bit of genetic material. That genetic material is not supported. It isn't turned into a cell. It's not alive. It is nothing more than a tiny little waste bag. Waste bag of genetic material, which means it's inside the cell. It means that the cell, the DNA structure of the cell, is starting to disintegrate. Why would it do that? Because it's ill. If you then have such a disintegration of your DNA,
the illness came
comes first. The cell is unhealthy, and these viruses are the first sign. These viruses, these little bags with the genetic DNA in, little bits of it, are the first sign of cellular structure breaking down. When the cell continues to be ill, can't recover, then you get more of these little bags, genetic code falls apart, cell dies, and you're left with a whole bunch of debris.
Is it true then to say, from my limited knowledge, that scientifically it's never been shown that a virus enters a cell and causes disease?
No. This is beautiful, because really the only thing that we've got is the story they tell us and computer animation that makes it real for us. They have pictures like, you know, electronic pictures, electromagnetic pictures that will show that these are very blurred, and they will show in gray and white, you know, little blobs, and then they tell you that's a virus, okay? And there's another one, and that one sits on the cell membrane, and that one sits inside. But these are still pictures. There's no movement. You can't see the movement of these little bags, which means you don't know whether they're going inside or outside. You don't know where they're coming from. So they've created the same story as they have done for bacteria and fungi and all the rest of it.
And we have a lot of these viruses within us that are associated with disease anyway.
They have associated the viruses with the diseases, right? Again, there is no proof. With bacteria, you can see them moving around, you can see them eating. So you can say, well, there you are, you know, healthy tissue, no bacteria. Tissue starts to break down. Oh, look, there is one, and it starts to come. And that's what people have done. That's what researchers have been doing. Viruses, you can't do that. You only have their story. And what they've done is just replicated the story that they have and still maintain for bacteria. They're now telling of viruses. Viruses attack us from outside. Yeah? But whenever researchers have tried to give people illnesses, specific illnesses, by exposing them to viruses, nothing happens.
It's a little bit similar to the monetary system, is that we never question the foundation.
No, that's the
at all.
point.
We get confused with economics, but we never question the foundation.
Yeah.
Well, that leads us on really to antibodies, because with this germ theory, they're saying, well, we need something to protect us. We've got the solution, our body's got the solution. If we can create antibodies proven to protect us, that's what we're told. But this doesn't actually seem to be true, does it?
No. Antibodies, first of all, there are no specific antibodies. So antibodies, they are responses that we can measure inside the tissue, but they're never specific. What does that mean? It means that you can have a high level of antibodies, and that can be triggered by a number of microorganisms or a number of other factors. There may be toxins that create a high level of certain antibodies. So it's never specific. So there is no test in the world that will actually say, here you are, you know, this is a test, and that only shows that you've been infected with this or that disease. That's one problem with it, right? Because the medical profession does use it that way.
They don't seem to know if it's a signal of being infected or being immune.
That's the other thing. You know, they use it both ways.
With HIV, I've read in your
yes,
literature.
with HIV and with others, whenever it suits them, when you go and have a blood test and they test an antibody and you have a high level, on one occasion the doctor will tell you, you don't have to worry about, you know, catching rubella or whatever, because you've got a high protection level, you have high level of antibodies. Somebody else, they do a test and they go, you've been infected with rubella, hepatitis C, whatever. And you go, I've never had any trouble with my
I know
whatever.
The Informed Parent with Trevor Gunn, a friend of yours, wrote regarding antibodies. We've got the response there, or the quote, and they wrote to a Dr. Clements a while back, and he admitted that there was no connection between antibodies and immunity.
No.
And if anybody wants to read this quote, if they go on the Informed Parent website, they'll see the full response there.
Yeah.
So they've known that for at least 20 years.
They've known that much longer than that. Much longer than that. They've always known that antibodies is not a good way of even testing immunity. Actually, there is no way of testing immunity, because we see a lot of people with low antibody levels, with low white blood cell counts and what have you, and still they never seem to catch a disease.
And it's a small part of the immune system.
this is probably I'm saying a part of the immune system, but we don't actually know what it means, and we've never known what it means.
Would it be fair to say that this comes into action at the end stage of a disease process to clear up, help the clearing up? Therefore, it doesn't affect the initial cause of illness. Just having an antibodies can't protect you from. It can't protect you from
anything.
Bad food.
It can't protect you from a lifestyle. It can't protect you from anything, and you can't use it as either a scary thing, to tell people that they have to be afraid of catching this disease, or tell them that they are immune and they're safe.
So if we move on to vaccination and say, they tell us we vaccinate because it simulates illness. They tell us it creates antibodies to give us protection, and that they're safe. Yeah. So what we're talking about today, nothing that seems to add up at all.
Actually, when you go through the history of vaccinations, it is very obvious that it has never been effective. And but what we now know, it can never be effective because we don't get attacked from something outside, so we don't need to protect us from outside. We need to protect us from ourselves.
And obviously we vaccinate our children because
we vaccinate
of fear.
Children
and we have all these childhood diseases. Probably the one that's got public in the public eye more is measles. We have a lot of propaganda about measles
at the moment,
about being dangerous, etc. And yet, my understanding is if you have measles, it's because you need to have measles.
Well, all these common childhood diseases have always been there. And what is interesting is that they occur at specific times in the child's life. And when you look at tradition, even tradition in our culture, it shows that when these children were getting the particular disease, like measles, then the community that the children were living in actually knew that this was a signal. When one gets ill, the others that are at a similar development stage.
Nothing to do with passing virus from one to the other.
No, it's a development stage that the child goes through. And what happens with development stages, it means that you move from being this format into that format. And that means that your tissues, your body or part of your body needs to change too. Change means break down what is there, or partly breaking down, and rebuilding it in a different way. That breakdown, that leaves you with what? Cellular debris.
Viruses.
And viruses, that is just cells that are no longer functional. It needs to be cleared up. So you can get viruses or bacteria that you can identify inside those sites. You clear it up. 7 days later, everything gone, and you're fine. We then say, now you're immune to that. What it actually means is that if you allow that common childhood disease to come through, all the debris to be cleared up, you're left with a healthy new structure, then you will never get that again. Why not? Because you don't go through that stage of reformation again, ever.
So if vaccines were proved to block that rather than cause immunity, that would actually be building up problems in the body.
The vaccines are not actually blocking anything. But what they do is they put a different strain on the system. In other words, it introduces toxins into the system. So then this tiny little new human being has to deal with those toxins, which it normally would never come across. So it deals with that. And that means that it the development stage that it's got to go through is delayed. So the rebuilding of the structure is delayed because it hasn't got the energy to do that.
And this is why we need the boosters on vaccines.
That is what they do with the boosters.
Because there's no immunity.
They keep doing that so that your system is busy with the toxins that they inject. And it's got to clear that out, and the rest stays inside. And then you have the problem that with certain individuals later on in life, certain circumstances, whatever, then they come across this transformation that they should have had when they were 5 or 6.
So if we go to what the government say, and if we can bring up some of their graphs, they're saying with the introduction of vaccination, it saved us from infectious disease.
Yeah.
Here we have the measles on the left. Now you can see they have notifications. The vaccine comes in around there just before the 70s. There's quite a sharp drop. Everything looks fine. It saved us from infectious disease.
Right.
They say they didn't have very good notifications before that point. That's where they start at that point. But
really,
what we've done, we've taken the death rate, which there is good notifications, and we see, look, what's that telling us really?
I think this is a typical graph that you find for all infectious diseases. And there's a couple of comments that you can make. First of all, obviously, when you look at the death rate, then you see a dramatic drop to almost 0 before the vaccination program begins. And this is what every single scientist and researcher that has been looking at vaccine tells them. It's every single time the drop in
and it's not
problems.
just measles.
It's not measles. You see it with all infectious diseases. The drop occurs before the vaccination. And actually, scientists have said that the main reason for that is the change in lifestyle. It all comes at with a change of getting clean water, getting better sanitation, and so on.
So if we bring up the other graphs, we have diphtheria, whooping cough, etc.
We see a similar thing.
Story.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the other thing about it is that when they use notifications to make up their graphs, they still don't have good notification. You can't, because the only way that you can make sure that a doctor will actually take the trouble to fill in a form each time he thinks, right? Because that's another thing. How are you going to prove that the particular disease that I'm looking at, that is measles, or that is German measles, or that it is whooping cough? Because there is no test to actually prove it. So it's only this hearsay, the interpretation of the doctor.
And
he then needs to fill in the form.
If there's an infection going around, they will just automatically say this is measles.
This is what they do when they see 2 or 3 similar cases. They'll go, oh, it's that. The other thing they do is when you've been vaccinated, then they just assume that you cannot have that disease, which means in notification there's a clear drop after you introduce a vaccination program. And that is simply because the doctor actually says this can't be that particular disease because you are now immune to it because you've been vaccinated. Whole story, complete and utter rubbish.
I mean, some of the stuff I've heard on vaccines, we could sit here all day and talk about.
Yeah,
some
sure.
of the reclassification of disease,
yes.
the juggling with the figures, etc.
Yes. All happened.
They're claiming these neurotoxins aren't linked to autism. You've got aluminium, mercury, all sorts of junk, basically, that we know is toxic. You don't have to be a scientist to know this.
Now, one thing I could add to that, and that is that right in the early stages of developing vaccines, the scientists were still pretty much in tune with what they were doing, and they had the idea that all this extra stuff shouldn't be in the vaccine. So it should just purely be the material, if you like, that you wanted a response from within the body. And they found that when they injected pure isolated bacteria inside the body, that nothing happened. And the only way they could have an immune response, i.e., higher antibody levels or white blood cells or whatever, was to add a toxic product to it.
An adjuvant.
Yes, and always toxins.
And isn't one of the most popular ones aluminium?
Yes.
And a popular preservative is mercury.
Yes.
Which is, we're told, avoid mercury. It's one of the most dangerous things.
Apparently it's good for babies now.
I believe you find it in these energy light bulbs.
Yes, that's right.
Which one school I knew wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
But there's actually a procedure by the government. You have to evacuate the classroom if a light bulb breaks.
Yes. Which
is a bit mad. If we can bring up the scarlet fever one and the TB one.
Right.
Because this is quite interesting. So we have the TB, which shows basically there is correlation between the death rate and notification.
Yes.
So, it does go that higher notifications, you'll get a higher death rate.
Mm-hmm.
The scarlet fever one is quite interesting. Because here we have a graph from the 1860s, and we see scarlet fever, quite a big fear around that time of that, and now it's pretty much disappeared out of sight. And obviously the punchline, there was never any vaccine.
No, they were too late to develop it.
Yeah.
They were literally too late. They had developed it, and they went, oh, it's gone. There's nobody there anymore.
Well, if this information was sent to the Department of Health, and their response basically is yes, this is their data, because the important thing to see is these graphs are their own graphs.
Yes.
From the same source. And if you can just read vaguely through there, now what they're basically saying is the JCVI who get this information together publish, you can see the word relevant in there. So they're publishing what is relevant to their vaccination program.
Absolutely.
Now, the undisputed fact that vaccinations didn't save us from infectious disease isn't relevant to their vaccination program.
No. What is relevant to their vaccination program is what is relevant to keep the ivory tower up. So they want to continue telling the same story to make people afraid of their surroundings, and they being the heroes that will come and save us.
And also on the second page on the response, we quoted them the law, which is their own law. If you go on the internet, put in something like consent to vaccination, we can see there, it says must be voluntary and informed. Well, is this informed? By not publicising, because we've seen that they only publish the graphs from about the 50s. Yep. So by not publishing the other graphs, can you make an informed decision? Well, the question is this fraud? Basically, this is quite serious.
Well, whatever they call informed, that actually means, has anyone from our side spoken to you? Yeah?
Now we know
anybody else doesn't matter.
The doctors in their Green Book on immunisation are given the graphs from the 50s. So even your doctor isn't aware.
No,
a lot of
doctors
aren't aware of
this.
No,
doctors don't know. Don't blame doctors. They only do as they're told, and they believe, just as we all do, what we're told. There's some
you would
authorities.
believe on the information given.
Yes,
that they're given that vaccines are very good for us.
Exactly.
You would believe that.
The other word that you mentioned was voluntary. Right? Now, in my book, if something is voluntary, it means that I have to have no fear to say no. Go and try it.
Yeah. I mean, I know for a fact the word non-vaccinating and neglect is coming into society now.
Yes.
It's coming into the system that non-vaccination is neglect.
Yes. And they try limit it, and they will always be limited, because there's one thing that they will not do, and that is to have an open public debate in court about scientific proof, because they can't. They don't have the proof to back up their story. Science has got plenty of proof for over 100 years to back up the story of microorganisms come from inside and they're a result of the disease, not the cause.
And obviously, they're claiming that this literature is out there in this letter. But we can see that if you go into your local health centre, the literature they give you is simply pro-vaccine.
Yes, it's one direction. Actually, I think it's even more than that, because they know there is a growing swell of people that will question this. They get very angry. Yeah. You know, and their anger is the response to somebody asking questions. Not even saying, I'm not doing this, just asking for more information, and all they get back is anger.
Well, I think what we can gather from this today is basically people just go out and do your own research. You can go onto the Informed Parent, go on Patrick's website. Another book recommended is Trevor Gunn called Soma Wisdom. There's a lot of information out there, and just make up your own mind.
Make up your own mind. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you very much.